Unsere nächste Referentin ist wissenschaftliche Assistentin hier an der Uni Bern am Institut für Kunstgeschichte. Ihr Spezialgebiet ist die flämische Renaissance. Sie redet 8 Sprachen, eine davon ist yucatanisches Maya. Sie wird aber ihren Vortrag auf Englisch halten, sonst wären unsere Übersetzer dann doch relativ stark gefordert. Sie redet heute über Macht und Kommunikation und wie die Machtverlagerung kommen durch die neuen Medien. Ganz herzlich willkommen, Dr. Sarah Joan Moran.
Thank you. Okay, sadly, I thought my Swiss German was getting better, but I only got about 4% of that last talk, so I'm going to have to work harder. Thank you. Now, I'm going to talk today about the notion of individuality, its importance in terms of social justice, and how I think the ways in which technology, the nature of how we receive, process, and engage with media today is shaping our awareness of the individual and subjective nature of human experience. Now, my examples are going to be pretty much from English media. I think that you can make global arguments, but it's much easier if I stick to one language. So before getting started, I want to make it clear that when I say individuality, I'm not talking about the political theory of individualism, nor do I mean the social pressure that we might feel to be unique or to stand out from the crowd. What I'm talking about is rather the conceived individuality of other people, as opposed to oneself. I'm talking about whether we as human subjects think of other humans as belonging to a predetermined group and make assumptions about them based on group membership, or whether we, in contrast, imagine others as having their own identities, their own points of view, their own experiences, their own motivations. This notion of individuality, of the individuality of others, is also an embracing of its inherently unknowable nature, accepting ambiguity and maintaining a flexibility of mind that allows others to define themselves to us on their own terms. Adopting such a progressive attitude is, I think, important on every social level, but it's truly crucial when we're thinking about strangers, since it's largely the assumptions we make about the 7 billion or so people in the world that we've never met that shape policies and perpetuate social inequality. And because so much of what we think about the world's strangers is informed by the mass media, meaning textual or visual messages that are meant for and accessible to a large audience, the ways in which we relate to media are extremely important. A major factor here is, of course, the role of the mass media in reproducing and perpetuating stereotypes. Historically, relatively few people from dominant social groups have controlled the mass media, and people in power tend to tell stories that legitimate, preserve, and increase their own power. Whether it's intentional or not, part of this has always been promoting negative ideas about disenfranchised groups. Yet at the same time, since the earliest days of print, which is my usual focus, there have consistently been people talking back to the dominant narratives, saying this or that stereotype is not true and it is harmful. With the rise of democracy and the immense diversification of the media, especially over the last century, these voices of dissent have multiplied, and in the Western world, they have spurred major social progress, particularly in terms of civil rights and gender equality. Yet the stereotypes remain remarkably consistent. Why is this? One reason is that as human beings, we're psychologically hardwired to put things into categories. This allows us to learn about the world and interact with it. It allows us to form language. A second reason, and one that's been studied by sociologists and media scholars, seems to be that the only really effective counter to the stereotyping of certain groups is personal knowledge of individual members of that group. And often familiarity like this is just simply lacking. A third reason that stereotypes persist is because we give enormous power to the idea of averages. Now, ascertaining averages for groups of people is very important for things like medical research, engineering, and marketing, but it becomes problematic when we create a notion of an average X person. So an average immigrant person, an average Muslim person, an average female person. These average people become very real to us, and in a sense, they seem to be impactful on the very individuals on which they are based. So we expect individuals to match up with that average. Now, this latter expectation seems to be changing. About 2 years ago, I ran across an article by David Barish in the Chronicle for Higher Education, which argues for the kind of recognition of ambiguous individuality that I'm talking about, though he limits the scope of his article to research approaches in the biological and social sciences. More recent is a study by Ernesto Boyle and Herman Aginis, I'm not sure how you say this, which claims that individual achievement doesn't fit a bell curve, but is rather far more variable. Now, I'm not interested so much in the study's scientific validity, but I am interested in the fact that there's such a wide audience for what amounts to really an attack on the idea that people are average. And I see it as indicating a possible paradigm shift in how we conceive of others. If this shift is actually happening, I think it's rooted in the recent dramatic changes in how we relate to the mass media. The digital revolution has created a kind of media landscape that we've never encountered before. Among the most obvious shifts and a major focus of research and media studies over the past decade or so are the rise of social media on the one hand and blogging on the other. These have been cited as fostering new kinds of community and new ways for individuals to negotiate and express their identities. They are also, of course, responsible for a huge increase in the sheer volume of text and images that have been produced. But the fact is that the audience for most of this content remains small. We still get most of our information about the wider world from a relatively few large news sources. What's radically different now versus just a few years ago is the ways in which we're interacting with these news sources. And a major factor is that users are now routinely adding content to the websites themselves. So I'm just giving a few examples, one from the Huffington Post, and this is a screenshot I took a couple days ago. This is among the top 10 news sites in the world with an estimated 54 million viewers last month. And they're now hosting live discussions of political topics using video chat. These discussions are structured to engage people from all over the United States who have various types of personal experience with the issue at hand, and they typically also touch on the politics of reporting itself. A second and simpler type of interaction occurs in the comment sections on news websites, and you see this happening up here on the right. These are especially interesting because of the ease and the speed with which anyone can make their voice heard to a remarkably large audience. You can see it here on the Huffington Post site and also on the often more entertaining but much trashier conservative UK site, the Daily Mail. Now, although comment sections can and do become platforms for spreading stereotypes about race, class, sexuality, etc., they are also spaces in which we can hear and react to the voices of people from other groups. They constitute fleeting but significant instances of direct contact with strangers, like the trans woman speaking here in the comment section right here, so Marlene in the middle. These allow for connections that let us conceive of these people as individuals rather than generalized abstractions. And finally, we come to Twitter, and I'm interested particularly in haters, so people who make public declarations denouncing a particular person or institution. Although this phenomenon in the form of cyberbullying can be absolutely terrible, when we're calling people out, I think it's a very, very good thing. So here, this is people criticizing American Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Boehner, for basically perpetrating hatred and misunderstanding. As we become more and more aware of people's individuality, as they share the opinions that they have that may surprise us, that make us question our preconceptions, I hope that we are moving towards a new theory of the other, a theory that embraces ambiguity and a willingness to defend true diversity and human dignity. And I encourage all of you to take advantage of the opportunities there are to make your own voices heard within the media. I encourage you to talk back. Thank you.
Thank you very much.